Hello and welcome back to the Coin Stories podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brunell, and I'm talking to leading voices in Bitcoin and macroeconomics about their origin stories, Bitcoin headlines and news topics, and this movement to fix the world by fixing the money. This podcast does not provide financial advice. Before I share this week's episode, here are some messages from my sponsors who make this show possible. First of all, are you ready for Bitcoin 2023? I certainly am. This year's Bitcoin conference was absolutely amazing. I got to spend a week in Miami with tens of thousands of Bitcoiners from around the world, and I'm so grateful that I had the chance to anchor Bitcoin Magazine's live desk and MC the main stage. If you missed the event, you can catch all 3 days of incredible Bitcoin content over on Bitcoin Magazine's YouTube channel. And also, it's never too early to start making plans to attend the next conference. Bitcoin 2023 tickets are already available and super early bird rates do not last long. So you can visit b.tc/conference/2023 and secure your pass before prices increase. This show is also powered by OKCoin, my favorite place to DCA without the crazy fees. OKCoin recently launched an amazing initiative called Crypto for All, which is aimed at democratizing knowledge and access to Bitcoin. OKCoin is one of the fastest growing and most secure global cryptocurrency exchanges that serves all your needs for Bitcoin and is committed to investing in educational content, funding crypto developers and entrepreneurs from underrepresented groups, and helping more diverse talent work on crypto ecosystem projects and careers. OKCoin has actually contributed more than $1 million to Bitcoin core devs and counting, has one of the most active Lightning nodes, and recently launched Sats mode. To open an account and start stacking, head to okcoin.com/Natalie and get $50 in Bitcoin when you sign up. All right, I'm super excited to have with me BTC Archive, one of the most followed accounts in the space. Archie, thank you so much for coming on Coin Stories.
It's a pleasure to be here, Natalie.
Okay, so I don't know what you look like. I've had one of these interviews before with Plan B, so we'll picture you in our heads what you might look like. But I know you're from the UK, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your background? Give us something.
I can give you something, and I'm not from the UK. I live in the UK, but I'm Australian.
Okay.
I'm from Melbourne originally, yeah.
And so what was your upbringing like? I mean, eventually I want to know how you got into Bitcoin, but anything you can share just about your young life, maybe like what career you followed?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, look, my upbringing was fairly ordinary, really, working class, probably on the poorer side of working class, to be honest. Just growing up in working class suburbs and all that entails, as you can imagine, we didn't have much. My story is similar to your story. I'm the son of immigrants, I kind of scratched my way into a higher education. Actually, it wasn't something that I particularly liked all that much. I didn't really pay too much attention in school because I didn't enjoy it. It's not because I couldn't stomach the work or it was too intellectually challenging. I just didn't enjoy it, couldn't focus really, but somehow managed to get into a mediocre university, getting a mediocre degree, and somehow scratching myself a living halfway across the world. So I managed to do that, thankfully, and so here I am, really. How I got into Bitcoin is kind of in a roundabout way. I'm really surprised, actually, because I still am part of a forum that kind of like a discussion forum, and Bitcoin did come up around about 2012, 2013. And I was surprised at how close to the mark my comments and questions were back then, because of course I'd forgotten all of them. It was only when I started investing in Bitcoin in 2020 and then started the account later on, I sort of thought, let me just revisit some of those comments and see what was there. And I was really surprised, asking all the same questions, or really good questions about, well, why does gold have any value when, okay, if you're going to criticize Bitcoin for not being backed by anything, what the hell is fiat backed by? And what is that worth? Why is that worth anything? So questions like that, fundamentally, I kind of understood where to inquire. I really didn't follow it up all that much. And I was, I gave it some thought as to why that was. And I suspect I was just in the mindset at that time. I was really into sort of the startup scene and learning all about that and how venture capitalists and angel investors sort of structure their portfolios, how they manage their risks and that sort of thing, and try to understand what they do. And I suppose I kind of viewed Bitcoin in that way, just as a nascent technology, immature, a lot of risks to really unfold and, establish itself. Not that I have a technical background to be able to understand its architecture and all the rest of that. I have actually spent very little time trying to understand the technical aspects of Bitcoin. But the principles underlying its design, its purpose, I was surprised that I did understand that. So, looking back some many years later, sort of just inquiring within, trying to understand why I didn't invest back then. And I did find some comments that I said, oh, I'm watching the price, and if it dumps to 200, I'm going to just whack 1,000 on it and just let it fly. And I remember the feeling, and it stayed with me, that it never did reach 200. And it kind of just sort of crept up further and further away from that. And I just sort of paid it no mind, because I was too busy, I was too busy losing money on on the stock market to care about what the hell Bitcoin is doing. And God knows, when I think about how much money I did have for that stage of my life, if I had to put that into Bitcoin, that would have been
I know. Woulda, coulda, shoulda, right?
Yeah, but I don't have any regrets, really. I don't have any regrets whatsoever, because I like the saying that you sort of buy Bitcoin at the price that you deserve.
That's true.
And frankly, like when I sort of come across people now who have been involved in Bitcoin all the way back then, or even any time before I did, I don't have any sort of envy or jealousy whatsoever. I'm just so happy for them that they did what they did, and they had the conviction, whether by luck or design, that they actually put their money on the line, and they're benefiting from it in much the same way that, I got in just before the bull run of late 2020, which has given me, a very good buffer into this bear market. And aside from the fact that I've been able to generate an income throughout this bear market, that, been quite healthy and has supported me all the way through. And I don't really have to worry too much about liquidating anything.
Wow. So you first heard about Bitcoin in 2013, but didn't buy until 2020.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because you know what? The technical barriers to actually buying anything at that stage, it just seemed like, gosh, why am I going to do all that work? And I just couldn't be bothered, I really couldn't be bothered overcoming that, because of course I had no conception at that time of what Bitcoin could have become at all. I mean, I understood the principles of it, and perhaps some of the ambitions that the advocates for Bitcoin, I probably would have considered them to be quite fanciful at that point, and probably justifiably so, until Bitcoin reached into the hundreds of billions. Many of the ambitions that people sort of advocated for were quite fanciful. It was only when it started to get to 200, 300, 400 billion that I said, okay, well, this is starting to get to the scale where it looks like it might begin to fulfill the promise. Because if you're advocating for Bitcoin to become a macro asset to help you deal with macro headwinds and conditions, well, then you need a certain scale. Otherwise, it's just going to be swept up with all the waves, and it's not going to be very steady in a turbulent ocean, is it? So, I just didn't give it any sort of credibility or staying power back then. I understood the sort of principles behind it, and sure, scarcity value is quite easy to understand, but I didn't ascribe any kind of staying power or realistic probability of it fulfilling those kinds of ambitions back then. Hence why I sort of viewed it as a very, very speculative venture investment more than anything. Yeah. So I look at guys like Max Kaiser, for example, putting so much money into Bitcoin from very early on. And I just sort of marvel at that kind of conviction, because he's obviously, it's not obvious to you because you can't see me, but he's a little bit older than me, quite a bit older than me. And he's got quite a lot of more experience in financial markets as well. So I guess that would have informed him about not only the evolution of money and store of value and all the like, but he'd also been in regulated markets and understood the game that's being played by, central bankers and
Yeah.
basically the inside game by all the people on Wall Street. So he would have understood that better. And I'm sure he probably saw something of an out and something of, some kind of potential within it, but to go all in as he did over many years. But
yeah,
I admire that kind of conviction. Yeah, I admire that quite a lot, actually, to have that foresight and mix it all in with your experience and put together that insight into action and, backing it up with conviction is really admirable.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I've said before that I didn't realize I had sort of a predisposition to appreciate Bitcoin because of what my family went through, losing everything in the 0809 financial crisis. But you mentioned you don't have a technical background. Did you have a financial background, or were you already thinking about the problems of central banking or the issues with money? Were you already studying that? And then Bitcoin was like, oh, there's like an aha moment at some point that this could be the fix.
I have to admit that I didn't spend too much of my childhood worrying about the problems of central bankers and but no, look, you mentioned the word disposition, and the positioning of Bitcoin as an outsider's game, finally sticking up the finger to institutions and the establishment, is so in keeping with my personality, because as soon as I feel any kind of belonging to a group, I just feel the need to kind of challenge that in somewhat destructive kind of ways. So this might be a confession that'll come back to haunt me perhaps in some time. But, I really like the appeal of Bitcoin being an outsider's game to start with. And I like the idea that it's accessible to everybody. I really like the idea that plebs are being mocked and ridiculed by all and sundry, from the media to the financial institutions. And in the meantime, we are laughing so hard because they just don't get it. They really don't get it, that they're losing this game and we are winning. And, and we're going to come out on top. And, it's the same thing is happening with countries, like I mentioned before, and I don't mean to use this term in a derogatory way, but the pleb countries, the so-called outsider countries, the countries that have been smashed around by financial institutions of the global sort of order, they're the ones. Finally, you just need one leader to stand up and say, hey guys, we're going in this direction. I know it's a risk, but I've got the political capital and I'm going to spend it on something that could make a massive change, a once in 100, 200, 300, 400 year opportunity for a country.
Yeah.
Because if this fails, what's the worst that can happen? We stay poor, we stay indebted. But fuck it, we'll write that off too, just like we've written off all the other debts that they keep piling up on top of us, and with their feet on our throats and not allowing us to get up and breathe and self-actualize and realize a future for ourselves that we all want. It's kind of like a large family, isn't it? And so why not take that punt on something that presents as a massive opportunity for you? So when you've got a president like Nayib Bukele and the gentleman in Central African Republic, I don't quite know how to say his name yet, but I will learn in due course. I love the conviction that they have. And it's really, really good that these countries are still being mocked by financial institutions and derided by the media, because it just shows, and it's become a bit of a meme and cliche, but how early we really are. And the greater the mockery and derision from those people, the more it actually convinces me that the bulk of the idea is still, of the opportunity is still ahead of us, that we haven't yet. I suspect we're just at the start of mainstream adoption, like just the tip of that. I don't, even though I spent, I think my original entry price was something like 13,000 or something like that. I've never felt that, oh, I'm late for this at all.
Right.
I wish I bought cheaper. I wish I'd bought more and cheaper, sure. But I never felt like, oh, damn, the opportunity is past in that regard. I've never felt that I was late, only that I wish I'd bought earlier.
Yeah. Well, when did you start your Twitter page, and what was the thought behind that? Because it's grown to be, I think, such an important page within the space, and you provide so many updates on headlines and adoption as it grows, lightning developments, all of it. So, what Why do that?
Well, I'm a little bit disappointed you didn't mention my humor and shit posting, but I'll look I'll look over that. I think it's a vital service I provide to the community. So, it says 2018, I think, that I started my Twitter page, but I'd always used it as a lurking account to follow various journalists and whatnot. So I stopped reading mainstream news quite some time ago. And I'd picked out certain topics and certain journalists that I'd followed very, very closely. Authors, artists, that sort of thing. And, around the time when I started putting my money into Bitcoin, I just noticed that I was following the news obsessively because, the thing that we haven't mentioned yet is we were going through a pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself, because of the nature of my previous life, with a lot of time on my hands. And I thought, okay, that's fair enough. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be watching the news all the time, I might as well do something about this. And I'd seen other accounts in different domains do something similar, like, the Spectator Index and Zero Hedge. And then when I saw, I think it was documenting Bitcoin started maybe 2 or 3 months before me, I thought I was getting some traction. I might give this a go myself. And then I just started doing that. And, after a few weeks, I kind of found my own voice, and I really just killed myself for about 8, 9, 10 months. And it was pretty much all I did day and night, to the extent where a lot of people I think they'd assumed that it was kind of a company and a group of people doing it.
Yeah.
Because people would comment, don't you ever sleep?
But it's all you. It's just you. No,
well, at that time it was just me. I've just a couple of weeks ago, I've got a researcher on board. Okay. But up until, so that's like, so I started January 2021, January 2nd, 2021. And I remember that because, anyway, it's a very significant date for me. But I started on January 2nd, and as soon as I realized, I just got 100 followers doing this today, I immediately, because of my past experience with social media and scaling and all the rest of that, I just knew that this was a snowball, and all I had to do was keep pushing. Mm-hmm. And the power of algorithms, the power of scale.
For sure.
It was a grind at times, particularly when there were lulls in the market and whatnot. But all I cared about was, am I still giving people something worth following for? Mm-hmm. And it was just my way also to just be involved in the community, be of service in some small way. I don't regard what I do as particularly important, but it's a little bit of value to a lot of people. So I quite like that I'm able to participate in the Bitcoin community in that way.
Well, I think you provide a lot of value, and I certainly really appreciate it. Since you follow, the headlines so closely, all the developments, is there something that's really maybe surprised you over the last year when it comes to Bitcoin?
I am surprised at how little the community of Bitcoin as a whole appreciates the enormous progress that's been made in the last 18 months, because most people, when I say the Bitcoin community, I largely mean the timeline of comments and whatnot, the replies in my account. It's not like I'm scanning the entire Bitcoin Twitter, really, because I don't have that capacity. I don't have the capacity to monitor all the conversations and every little niche of the community at all. So, but in terms of what I am exposed to, I just think quite a lot of people are obsessed with the price, and I understand why. I quite like price movement in a certain direction as well.
Yeah.
But so I guess, this is something that Michael Saylor's been talking about a lot, and it's something I try to instill in some of my tweets, just to remind people, if you haven't structured your affairs properly, your financial affairs properly, you're going to be vulnerable to price fluctuations. And we're seeing that right now, aren't we? Quite a severe decline in the price of Bitcoin that a lot of people did not foresee, which is, no crime in and of itself, but if you've structured your financial affairs to depend on Bitcoin gains, or at least stability, then you're going to have a problem. And the first thing I've always said is you've got to have an independent income. And if you don't do that, just go and get a job. Don't be proud. I know it's a pandemic, but don't be proud. Do the highest value job that you can get for yourself. And if that's a low value job compared to what your expectations are, just don't be proud. Just get yourself through the next 6 or 12 months.
Yeah.
I've certainly swallowed my pride many times over my lifetime. And so I don't say that without experience of having done the same for myself. Sometimes you've just got to do that, just get through the next trough in the market, in your life, whatever it is, and roll up your sleeves, get shit done, put food on the table, and live to fight another day. And that's what matters sometimes.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint, certainly with Bitcoin. Were you one of the folks who thought when it was riding up to, the 60s, almost touching that 70K mark, were you like, oh, it's going to keep going, we're going to hit 6 figures? Or did you think, with all the money printing, this excess is eventually going to fall by the wayside, it's going to drop off, and I should maybe not purchase at these prices? Because I feel like some people thought, oh, it's going to hit, 100, 150 before it drops back down and maybe has a support level of around 50. And others were at 70K sounding the alarm saying, no, like it's going to fall. Don't be buying at this point. Where were you at?
Natalie, I feel like your question's got a very passive-aggressive tone to it, because yes, I was one of those people. I genuinely thought we were flying to the moon at 60. I bought at 64K. So
okay.
I haven't stopped buying all the way through. So from the moment that I bought, I've just been buying kind of like I wouldn't say a mini sailor, but perhaps a nano sailor. I'm just buying whenever I have cash. I just buy more Bitcoin. That's what I do. I thought so. I mean, and I was looking at stuff that's on chain and whatnot. It was only in hindsight that certain things take on more prominence and significance, that you can say, oh, I see, that's what was happening, because such is the nature of this kind of analysis. And look, I'm not an analyst. I don't pretend to be an analyst. I sort of scan various things on Glassnode, on TradingView and whatnot. So I don't put a lot of time into it, because my idea is not to trade.
Right.
Okay. I'm buying to hold, and the price is a matter of interest for me. And if I definitely saw something that built up some kind of conviction in me about a significant price movement one way or the other, maybe I would take action. But it's not something I'm looking for. So I'm not a trader. I'm not a full-on analyst. There are people who take that role very seriously, and they do an exceptionally good job on it. But I'm not one of those people. So, but yeah, I absolutely thought in the 60s, I thought, here we go. Yeah, double pump, baby. First round was just a warm up, and here we go.
I know. I did too. I mean, I always expected there to be a crash, actually. And I had people on my show that were outside of Bitcoin that just were, financial market strategists and economists who said, we're headed toward a bust because of what they're doing with money printing. But I thought that Bitcoin would ascend to, a good 6-figure range. And then when it falls and it drops and people liquidate, that it would definitely be higher than what we're seeing right now, where it dipped below the previous cycle high. I didn't expect that. And I think we're probably going to go lower. Do you have any thoughts on just the macro environment right now? And do you think we found a bottom? Where do you see this going as they try to hike interest rates and we're just all in this big bear market?
All right. So thoughts from an idiot. Okay. So don't take it seriously. Some people may have the misapprehension, oh, he's got 1 million followers, so he must have some kind of expertise. I have zero expertise. Okay. I mean, I could do the analysis and I can give you a summary of what I think with great conviction. I'm just talking, to the third party here, not you in particular. I can do that, definitely. It's certainly part of my skill set to be analytical and whatnot. And performance analysis was part of my background and all of that. But it's not what I purport to present through my account. And so, having made that preamble, the macro is so complex right now. I don't even think specialists in macro can give you a summary of what is going to happen with a confidence level above 70%. I mean, if anyone said above 60%, I'd really raise an eyebrow.
Yeah.
I think, look, 50-50, there are probably about 6, 7, 8, maybe dozen or so factors that I hear the main sort of macro geopolitical analysts mention. And, if any one of them swings in a different way to expectations in any significant way, it just changes the entire landscape. So how do you make any kind of projection? And I guess, after having read Taleb's books, and I'm not sure I've absorbed the full wisdom of his books, but, from what I've understood is that, stop trying to predict as much as protect yourself from what may happen. And having said all of that, I still think there are certain concentrations in my sort of situation that I could manage a little bit better, but I'm kind of an idiot that way. I fall in love with ideas and I go all in or I'm not in at all. And so that's just a disposition that I need to manage. But going back to your question, what do I think is going to happen? Have we reached a bottom? I think there are so many indicators right now that say if we're not at the bottom, assuming we don't get just a total collapse in global macro factors, that Bitcoin probably is very close to a bottom, assuming we don't get another cascade of liquidations. So I think the risk factor, so if we talk about Bitcoin, the risk factor within the so-called crypto economy, if we get to about another 6 or 8 weeks without a major implosion, I would suspect that would subside a great deal, maybe not completely, but I think that will subside. So at the moment, there's still a little bit of traction. People are still having nibbles at various organizations trying to put pressure, feeding stories through various media outlets, just to see if they can get any kind of momentum on a short trade, on any kind of, stop loss hunting or anything like that, just to see if there's any more residual fear in the market that can be hunted out. So I still think we're in an environment where that risk factor is quite high. We should remember that between Terra Luna and what was the last one? Sort of that Celsius scare a week or so ago. That was 4 or 5 weeks of just straight across movement, 29.30, 29.30. And we all kind of got bored and a little bit complacent on Twitter about that price movement. And then we saw suddenly, just out of nowhere, there was a build-up of, I won't make any comments about who or what or why and ascribe any motivations, but there was a concentration of activity, shall we say, on Twitter about Celsius. And suddenly that built up into a crescendo and massive sort of liquidations. Now, everyone's got to take their responsibility in playing a role in that, including the target. Celsius has to take responsibility for leaving themselves open to such an attack, because part of your risk management strategy should be to make yourself impervious to attacks. So if you haven't done that, well, then you're not managing the risk correctly. You can't just say, oh, but they shorted us, well, or they attacked us, or they did that, but why didn't you take measures before to make sure that you were fortified against an attack? You just expect the goodwill of your financial adversaries to to shine upon you. No, that's not going to happen. So I think there's responsibility for everyone. So is the bottom there? I think I kind of tried to answer that, unless something else implodes, that another unknown, we don't know about that. But on the macro scale, I don't know what the Fed's going to do. I've been following our good friend Macro Scope 17, and he's just been giving the most eerily accurate guidance. I don't know if you know who he is.
Who is this?
So now I know that you don't listen in on my spaces because I've mentioned him so many times.
Oh, what's his name?
So there's a Twitter account by the name of Macro Scope 17.
Okay.
He's quite an experienced gentleman, been working in the markets on Wall Street since the 70s.
Okay.
And he's seen numerous economic, political, financial cycles, different administrations, all the rest of that. And he has just been calling the shots months in advance, particularly as it relates to the Fed and the political landscape in Washington. So he's one of the guys that everyone should be following. I don't know why he doesn't have 500,000 followers, to be honest with you. He's just been exceptionally accurate. And, companies will pay tens of thousands of dollars for that kind of for that kind of guidance and consulting expertise. Definitely.
Oh, I just followed him. Cool.
Yeah, he's really good. He's really, really good.
This episode is also brought to you by one of my favorite companies in the space, Fold. Fold is the easiest and most fun way to earn Bitcoin on everything you do. So if you're interested in Bitcoin, but you really don't know where to start, Fold is the perfect app. There's a daily wheel that you can spin every day for free, and you can earn Bitcoin, free Satoshis. Seriously, there's no catch. And one of my other favorite things is their card, the Fold debit card. You can actually earn Bitcoin back on every single purchase. So make sure to download the Fold app today. There's a referral link in the description. I'll have to look that up. Well, yeah. So are you concerned? I mean, you mentioned the exchanges and these third parties where people go to buy their coins. And like Saylor has said on the news, and I sort of quoted him recently, a lot of these, companies and tokens, they're cross-collateralized with Bitcoin. So they pull the price down when they are having issues. If the price continues to dip, I mean, if we get to like the low teens, we could see more liquidity issues with these companies. So are you concerned about that?
Yeah, of course I am concerned about all of that. Of course, any type of leverage within an ecosystem renders it vulnerable to adverse price movements. That's a fairly safe conclusion to reach. What I've seen is that, when you look at, what I don't understand is the pattern of buying and selling of Bitcoin miners. They seem to, and perhaps people who understand that industry better than I, they seem to sell in bear markets and accumulate in bull markets. I think they should be doing the opposite. Because it seems that when they're selling under duress. And look at what they're doing now in all these, because in bear markets, all their equipment is cheap. In bull markets, they're expending all this capital, all this capital investment on machines at inflated prices, even though some of them buy at scale. They're still, when there's high demand, they're still going to be paying a higher price. And that's probably going to be exacerbated as if retail continues moving into mining through various services like Compass and the outsourced sort of thing. So I wonder what's happening there. So we know that leverage in a system, whoever's got the leverage, renders the environment vulnerable. But I don't really know. I don't really know what happens from here and who else has got the vulnerability. I tweeted the other day, Bitcoin miners have borrowed $4 billion against their equipment, or perhaps it was to finance their equipment. So that's a huge vulnerability there. And we don't know what's going to happen to the price, and we don't know if they're going to have to further sell down to to meet their debt covenants and whatnot. I get the feeling I'm not really answering your question. I'm just mumbling along into non-sequitur after non-sequitur. But
no, you totally are. You totally are. And I'm thinking about a lot of the same things. And it's funny what you mentioned about kind of now in hindsight, having the information. It almost does feel like, oh yeah, this was going to happen. We flooded the system with all of this money. Now they're trying to take inflation seriously. Every aspect of the market is bleeding. And, I think that some people were calling for some of this before, but I think most people just thought it was going to keep going for a while. And it just shows that wherever, the momentum is, you should maybe listen to like the contrarian voices, or, you don't want to be too sure you want to be a little bit careful, because something can shift. And this is a massive bubble, right? This is the everything bubble. Now we have a housing bubble, we have an asset bubble, we have crypto bubble. And once it starts to pop, it can be very painful very, very quickly. But in the end, the other thing I like to think about, and I know you've mentioned this before too, I wanted these prices when it was in the 60s. I was like, shoot, I can't accumulate as much, right? Like I wish I had more cash that I could allocate, because these prices will really pay off, and you'll be able to get gains that you wouldn't have been able to get if the ship kept running to the 6-figure mark. So what do you think is going to happen over the next, maybe, 1 to 5 years? I know none of us have a crystal ball, but do you think overall just adoption is going to grow and Bitcoin's price, do you think there's going to be more volatility because we're in an inflation or stagflation environment, or do you see the Fed pivoting and we're going to get a big money printer blast and then Bitcoin could shoot off to new all-time highs? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think the last part of your question, there seems to be a broad consensus that there will be something like a pivot eventually when the Fed realizes, oh shit, we fucked it up again. We fucked it up on the upside by not raising when the economy was booming, and we fucked it up on the downside because, you know, we were raising rates while everyone else was screaming, we're in a recession, we're in a recession. So someone tweeted the other day, and I thought it was a really interesting comment, that because of their embarrassment for getting it so utterly wrong on, you know, on the upside when the economy was booming, that they're just going to continue raising it until all the political risk has been sort of placed or displaced by consensus, by a really strong consensus. And they'll say, well, we had to raise because, of course, that was the obvious thing to do. You all wanted raises. We had to pivot because, you know, it was the obvious thing to do. We were in a recession and you were all screaming at us for doing so. You know, a lot of these institutions, these careerist types, they're risk-averse people. They're not ones for having the courage of their convictions, and they tend to wait until it's quite safe to take a certain decision and then enact it. They're not ones to really go against the crowd. And it's part of the reason why they're so successful within those kinds of institutions, is that they tell people what they want to hear and they go with the flow. And so one of the things Macroscope 17 has been saying is that watch for the comments that Larry Summers has been making, because at some point the establishment will want someone who's got a very recent record of talking tough, or taking the opposite position of the Federal Reserve, talking about stagflation and the like. And so he has been doing that on the sidelines, kind of angling for the job if Powell were to be expendable suddenly for all sorts of reasons. And despite Powell being reappointed, there's no guarantee that he'll see his term through, that's for sure, especially if the political landscape suddenly takes a turn. So look, it's so hard to understand what's going to happen on the macro side, but there does seem to be a consensus that, you know, they're just going to tighten until something breaks, so to speak. And you could argue that that's already happened. They're just waiting for the official numbers to flow through, waiting for the headlines to build, the media narrative to build. And so that political decision becomes de-risked. And so they can safely, in inverted commas, they can safely make a pivot without any career risk to any of the people who are going to make that choice. And we'll see that. I suspect we're going to see advanced warning of that when you see the markets perhaps start to moderate in their movements, getting ready for it. Because as you know, these people all know each other, they talk, and they know what's going to happen before we do, but we've got price signaling to tell us what might happen. And if we just use our sense, we don't need to identify catalysts. We just have to understand the nature of the beast and how it moves, and then we can anticipate some of those things. So then, what's going to happen then? We're going to be in a recession. They're going to acknowledge that it's a recession. They're going to be faced with unemployment, businesses screaming, and I just can't see how a generation of leaders who have taken us down this path over 30 or 40 years, self-indulgent, weak, cowardly, I just can't... Have I said enough? I just can't imagine that they're going to backtrack all of a sudden and say, we need to set this ship right. It's going to be 5 or 10 years of pain, but we're going to reset everything from our financial system to our currency to our banking and legislation. And we need to go back to, lucid pricing signals and, accuracy in our markets and all the rest of that. I just don't think that they're going to do that. I mean, Japan was not able to make that choice.
Nope.
Because they, and they had a similar sort of, I wouldn't say it's the same thing, but, the principles at play are similar, where you have an older generation who are too cowardly to take the pain. So they took 40 or 50 years of inflation to pay their bills. And we've seen what's happened over there. They didn't have Bitcoin, but thank God we do. And so, which kind of sort of leads us on to the next thing, because, Bitcoin is, we've been sort of pushing the narrative of what Bitcoin is, and its fundamental virtues should be well positioned in certain circumstances that we're now seeing arise at the moment. But unfortunately, it's not playing out that way in the very short term, and it's giving a lot of people reason to doubt what Bitcoin actually is. And I've tried to make this reminder a number of times that actually a lot of people in Bitcoin and in the financial sphere understood what would happen to inflation as soon as the Federal Reserve and the White House announced what their fiscal and monetary response to the COVID crash was going to be. We understood that.
Yeah.
I have to admit that it took me a little bit longer to understand it because I wasn't attuned to Bitcoin and macro at that time. It took me a little bit longer. I'll get into that later. And so the people who've been buying all the way up until, what's the price now? About 20,000 now. Mm-hmm. If you bought all the way up until 17,000, your inflation has been hedged, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So you've had 2.5 years to hedge your inflation with Bitcoin. But, most people who are around then, they bought Bitcoin at 3, 4, 5, 9, 10,000, 12,000, 13,000. So how much hedging do you want from an asset class before you acknowledge that, hey, the group of people who were deciding on the price at the margin as they were entering into Bitcoin, recognizing that inflation was ahead of us, not only months before the Federal Reserve acknowledged the possibility even, but years before, almost 18 months to 2 years before inflation raised its ugly head in a way that we haven't seen for more than a generation or two.
Right.
So how much more price appreciation do you need to see before you can acknowledge, actually, maybe it did hedge inflation,
right.
But, such is the nature of a young, emergent, nascent asset that perhaps it did shoot a little ahead of its price. And now we're just seeing a bit of a correction down to more normal levels before it sort of settles, adoption builds and momentum builds, kicks off for the next cycle.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. And, Bitcoin has been pretty correlated with equities, but I believe that there is going to be that breaking point at some point where it's not a correlated asset anymore. And, a lot of people think that maybe at that point, there's just going to be a rush to get onto this Noah's Ark, if you will, onto this life raft that's going to save us from all the other things unwinding in the financial system. If that happens, though, you could picture that world as being a bit chaotic and not so peaceful of a transition. What do you think? I mean, is there going to be a point where everyone's trying to get into Bitcoin? And, I've heard some people think that Bitcoiners, especially public ones, might be in danger. And other people say no, because today, there's millionaires, there's billionaires, and they're not in danger. It's just some people have more money. Some people got in early. Some people have successful companies. Like, what do you think that actual transition from fiat to Bitcoin, whenever it happens, will be?
Bloody hell, Natalie! What
I know. I'm getting kind of dark. Getting dark.
That's not Noah's Ark. It's more like Mad Max.
Yeah, some people think it will be.
Yeah, it's possible. Okay. The transition. First of all, I don't know what the catalyst is going to be. I don't know that there needs to be catalyst necessarily so. And I think it's probably safer for society if it's a gradual dawning upon people. And I think that's how it will be. Just like, the internet and all that it offered, there was no sort of stampede towards the internet. There kind of was from a financial point of view, the dot-com bubble and whatnot, but that burst and then everyone sort of goes, oh, what kind of hysteria was that? And it was pretty quiet for a long time. And then the hard work of adoption started, building out the apps that actually people would use and it would present utility for them, things like Hotmail, messengers, that sort of thing. You had some of the more technology savvy businesses adopting various online tools for delivery, customer services, whatnot. But, digital is one of the things that I've had a little bit to do with. And it wasn't that long ago that I was in a financial institution and they still had senior level executives who thought the digital channel was kind of a fad.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So it's hard to fathom that there are still people like that. Now, these are not people in their 70s, right? Not to disparage people in their 70s, but we sort of say associate people who are older with being less tech savvy. But people in their late 50s, early 60s who still think that the digital channel is a fad and real business is conducted face-to-face through your branch network and whatnot. So there are still people like that. So what I'm trying to say is, I think Bitcoin will have a similar kind of evolution, perhaps accelerated because of the times that we live in, and we have a population that's much more adept at using new technologies.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder whether it's going to be something similar to that, but in a much condensed sort of period, rather than taking years for businesses to become digitized in that way. Bitcoin is working its way through the traditional financial system at a rapid rate, much faster than I envisaged when I was entering this space. Some of the work that companies like NYDIG and Galaxy Digital, you've got a massive custodial bank like Fidelity, for example. They're hugely bullish on Bitcoin. I think all of the biggest custody banks in the United States have a digital asset offering for their clients. Yeah. And every time I read one of these announcements, I see in the article, it's because of client demand, or at the very least, client curiosity. But, you don't go building entire teams composed of hundreds, if not thousands of people plus salespeople because your clients are curious. I'm guessing that the sort of conversations that these companies and executives are having are much more advanced than perhaps we can glean from the outside without having access to those kinds of people. And I want to do a better job of actually talking to some of these people.
Yeah.
Because I have started interviewing people on Spaces, so I just want to get into that.
Your Michael Saylor one was awesome. Very popular.
Oh, thank
too.
you. Yeah. It was popular, blew up. You had one just before mine, didn't you? And
yeah, yours was way bigger.
It's unfortunate we released that at the same time. I really didn't know. I just woke up one morning. I mean, what arrogance. I just woke up one morning and I thought, you know what? People would really like to hear from Michael Saylor today. It just had, the markets were sort of tanking and Twitter was just going ape shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Michael's really generous. He'd reached out ages ago, and I just thought, you know what? I'm not just going to ask to talk to him just because. I want it to be a particular moment in time that would be, significant to us both and also to the market. And so he was kind enough. He's super responsive and very, very supportive. Yeah. Yeah. So, I was really surprised and very happy that we got that one out. It was a pretty good discussion, actually.
That's great.
And it was well received. So I don't have a lot of experience doing this. And I love watching you do it because you are a pro and you're so slick and well prepared. And I think I tweeted ages ago, I don't think people understand the work that goes into being as good as you are. And you just, I think the first time I saw you in the Bitcoin space, I don't even know how many followers you had. You might have just been like, I think you were just fresh out of your network TV stuff, like 5,000 followers or something.
Yeah.
Well, she's good.
I really appreciate that. That's very, very kind. Yeah. I haven't had your growth, your following, but I really appreciate it. I mean, we both have the same mission. I just want to do good for the community and educate people. And I love having these discussions because it strengthens my conviction and makes me think about things that I didn't think of before. On a personal or human experience level, we always say Bitcoin fixes this, Bitcoin fix the money, fix the world. But when you think about the state of the world and the things that people are going through everywhere in any country, I feel like there's so much that connects us. There are so many things that are universal. Like we want to take care of our families. We want to leave behind a better world or situation than the one we came from. We want to connect. Like what do you think Bitcoin can address, or what do you hope Bitcoin can address on that level? Or when you look at the way that things are and the pressures that exist today and people feeling like the wealthy are just getting more wealthy, like what do you really hope Bitcoin will do? You
mean on a personal level or for the world?
Both personal in your life, if you want to share, but also just on a grand level, the human experience.
Well, I think starting more broadly, I think people have the right that if they have worked and they've got some savings, a surplus from their labor, that they should have access to some kind of saving mechanism that at the very least preserves what they've worked for. And I think it's an absolute travesty that they don't have that. And as so many others have said, why should a laborer have to suddenly figure out how to go and bloody beat the market with investments and whatnot and become a landlord or whatever. Why should you have to do any of that? Now, I understand we live in a capitalist society, and part of that is that capital accumulates and we deploy that for more productive means and whatnot. Fine. But you should also have the opportunity of just keeping your money in some kind of savings mechanism, if that's what you want to do. Because, not everybody, for example, will get their savings to a scale that will add up to a deposit on one home, let alone a second home or a holiday home or a bungalow or anything like that. And that doesn't make them lesser people. They have every right to, having worked for their savings, to be able to preserve that. And I think society is structured in a way that robs them of that. And I think that's a grave injustice. It gives poor people absolutely no hope, because not only have we structured our economies in such a way that the vast majority of people don't have bargaining power for their salaries. And that's something that hasn't been acknowledged, and something that Bitcoiners actually, not only, I don't think they want to talk about it, they don't want to acknowledge it, because there are certain tendencies within the community, perhaps remnants of the early days, but still fairly strong to this day. But essentially, if you're going to say that you're a champion of the working class, you can't turn a blind eye to the fact that the working class are absolutely trodden over. And we're talking in the UK, United States especially, was absolutely disgraceful. But, certain ideological positions preclude people from saying, hey, the minimum wage, well, it's gone nowhere in 30 years. That's an injustice. It precludes people from saying, well, people at the bottom, the only way that they could demand a living wage and dignified working conditions was if they unionized. But, there are certain political persuasions that have profound objections to unionization. But, these are things that really affect people in a way every bit as profound as inflation does. Yeah, they want to talk about inflation because inflation affects them personally. And then they want to pretend that we've got solidarity with all of these working class people when it comes to inflation, but then throw them under the bus when it comes to their inability to negotiate a decent salary for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of self-interest and selfishness within the Bitcoin community when it comes to politics and economics as well. But it's not something I tend to push heavily on my account, because that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to encourage people to understand Bitcoin, understand what's happening with adoption, why it's really important. So that's what I'm there for. But there are a lot of contradictions within Bitcoin. I think there are certain people who want to impose their political views on the Bitcoin community, and I like to see actually a plurality of views when it comes to politics, economics, and all sorts of things, even if I'm not supportive of them.
Archie, how has Bitcoin changed you?
I'm not sure it's changed me, actually.
Really?
No, I don't think it has. So I know people say, well, because a lot of the tendencies, as I said, I've always been sort of a little bit rebellious. I've never really wanted to fit in. Which is bizarre, now I have 1 million people and consider myself an outsider, and I'm sure people roll their eyes when they say that, because to a lot of people, I'm sure this account is kind of like part of their Bitcoin experience, and perhaps even a central part of their Bitcoin experience, in a way that I don't really have any conception of. I still see myself sort of like this isolated guy with a Twitter account, and I'm just doing what I'm doing. And other people are probably saying, Jesus, this guy's all over my fucking timeline. And I don't have that experience. All I'm thinking about is, I need to find some really good news. What's happening in Bitcoin? What can I bring to people today? So I still consider myself an outsider. I don't really know too many people within the Bitcoin community, and very few of them have reached out to me. Or I should rephrase that. The only people who seemingly reach out to me are people who want something.
Ouch.
So, well, it's to be expected, to be honest.
Yeah.
What do you expect? Yeah. So, so I still see myself as an outsider, and I love it that way. Like, I'm not going to, nothing is going to change in that regard. I quite like an outsider. I didn't ingratiate myself into the community. I didn't ask permission to start my account or to start doing what I do.
Yeah.
And if, I don't know how that was received, or I had no conception of that. So has it changed me? I don't think so. I think there's been kind of a confluence of factors within the Bitcoin community that I found that align with my personal values. And there are certainly things that I don't really like. And I'm just like, well, I'm strong enough to pick and choose what I like and not really care too much about the things that I don't. And it's not like I came into the space looking for personal validation. So I don't need any of that. I didn't need it when my account had 0 followers, and I don't need it now. So it's not like it's hubris on my part. I just want everybody to feel welcome, whoever they are. And if there's a corner of the Bitcoin community that they can make their own, I want to encourage that. So I've tried to do that by elevating certain voices that I don't know that they've been marginalized, but perhaps they were just new or just hadn't gained any traction, or, and you find some absolute gems, not to take credit that I found them, but, I'm on Twitter and I see them, and if I, try to give them a bit of a boost, I like to do that. And especially when they come under pressure, I like to support them as well, and to let people know that they're not alone in doing what they're doing. And I love what they do.
For sure. Well, so do you go to any of the Bitcoin events or conferences, but like fly under the radar because no one knows what you look like?
I haven't done that yet.
You got to come to Bitcoin Miami.
Well, the thought did cross my mind to come to Miami. I'm not sure that I'd want to go to the conference, to be honest. I mean, conferences, like I love it. No, you like the conferences because you worked at it, didn't you?
Yeah. I'm a nerd for the conferences, honestly. Like I actually listen to the panels, and sometimes I take notes, and I don't know. I like
really.
I always learn a lot. Yeah, for sure.
Like
there's always something to learn. That's what's great about this space is you're never an expert. You could be, you could think Bitcoin pretty well, but there's always something to learn about, like building on the blockchain and Tarot and Lightning. And I don't know. I just think it's just so great. There's so much to learn about energy and mining and the infrastructure and the legislative aspect. That's complicated. So yeah, I like going to the conferences.
I just wonder what I don't know if I enjoy it. And I'm in two minds. I'm like, maybe I should go while I'm still not known. Well, I'm still, I'm not really recognized. Nobody really knows me. I mean, I've only met a couple of people from Twitter.
Half the people, they walk up to you and like they have, memes or avatars for their profile. So you can hide your identity well. You can be pseudonymous. So it's pretty easy. But as I start to wrap up, what do you want to talk about? Like, what are you most excited about or curious in the near future? What do you want to talk about with Bitcoin?
Yeah, I don't really know. I'm sort of looking at this macro landscape in a bit of a daze and thinking what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Reading quite a lot about that. That really interests me at the moment. The strange thing is, because I've just been so immersed in what I'm doing for the community and for this account, it doesn't really allow me to do the sort of deep reading and analysis that I myself in a professional capacity, because of course what I'm doing now is so completely removed from what I have been doing most of my life. But I like that now I'm getting a little bit of headspace. I'm finding a little bit more room. So perhaps I need to look. So I've just started reading some books on Bitcoin.
Okay.
Just
like which ones?
Well, all the usual.
Okay.
I bought Alex Gladstein's book, and I haven't read that yet. I think I bought that about a month ago, because I've read some of his work, online, and I'm familiar with his timeline and the work that he's done there. But to sit down and actually read someone's considered thoughts in a sort of concentrated way is a different experience altogether. So I really like what he does, particularly, anyone working in the domain of human rights, and then partnering that up with Bitcoin, of course, is really, really important. I'd like to get more into what he's doing and understand that a little bit better, because one of the strongest cases for Bitcoin is the humanitarian aspect that gets underplayed so much by people typically highly educated, typically very well paid, and living in a cocoon, often a media cocoon, cloistered within their own communities, and then espousing the uselessness of Bitcoin from such a privileged position that it just infuriates me. I just want to punch that fucking bubble up. It really infuriates me, because they have no empathy for people who are not like themselves, and that includes people within their own country, their city, their neighborhoods, and typically they despise people who are any different from them. And they just can't see beyond their own ignorance, and they're so assured of their views despite their ignorance, and it just infuriates me. So I love the work that he's doing to puncture those kinds of bubbles. Particularly, his articles are really easy to share, and a lot of people are doing work. So I'm getting exposed to a lot more of that sort of domain through his work. Saifuddin's book, of course, everyone's reading that or has read that. But I've been in this space for so long. I'm already so well versed in all of the arguments, because his work pervades throughout most of the discourse. He's I guess his book was pivotal for a lot of people. So what do I want to talk about? I don't know. I'm really excited about the future, though. The future of adoption, the future of what the world with more prominent Bitcoin sort of ecosystem. I'm really interested to see what kind of position Bitcoin takes in society when the normies come on board. Like, are they going to start talking about it like real estate? Am I not going to be able to escape from these barbecue conversations? All of these things, because I just think, we're at the tip of the iceberg, and I want to see some more humor in the Bitcoin community. I want to see the crypto couple doing more videos. I love their stuff.
Love them. Yeah.
And I want to see what happens with your career as well. I love that you've stepped out, and I want to, maybe that's a private conversation, but I want to talk to you about your experience stepping out.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about that anytime. No, I love it. I'm so grateful to be in this space, and it's been incredible to just meet people that are passionate, like-minded, altruistic, want to make the world a better place. So I love it all. All right. Well, price prediction for the end of this year. Give us one.
End of this year. I don't know, but people love to hear bullish prognostication. So I'll say 100 grand by the end of the year. How about that?
Wow. That would be amazing. That would be amazing. I don't know how they would have to really rev up that printer. Jay Powell is going to have to just warm it up.
I'll tell you, that could happen in like 4 months, right?
It could.
It could. People don't think it could, but I think we were having a conversation earlier on Twitter. It could well be that the so-called inverted commas natural bottom of this cycle was about 30, and these, cascading liquidation sort of pushed things down below where they might have otherwise settled.
Yeah.
And, we might see a month or two of that, some confidence trickle back up into the system. Maybe the Fed signals a little differently, and away we go. And because remember now, we've got a whole bunch of people who came in, and they're maybe waiting for the next pull. And social media has such a strong presence now. The culture of Bitcoin, the memes are so strong and so pervasive that it really does build a kind of resilience unlike any other investment class.
Yeah.
No other investment class has an account with 1 million followers and a corporate CEO with 2.7 million followers, or whatever Michael Saylor has got, and becoming so, this just doesn't happen in any other investment class.
I know.
So
totally.
There's something unusual happening here, and so don't underestimate how fast to the upside Bitcoin can move. But I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And it's really interesting to hear you say that, you're reading Bitcoin books? Because I feel like I spent the last 2 years doing that, reading everything about the history of the Federal Reserve and all that. And now, as we enter into this bear market, I am finally starting to read non-Bitcoin books. Like I just got, I'm reading a book from Preston Pysh, The Seat of the Soul. It's absolutely amazing. So I'm finally reading non-Bitcoin books, which is funny because for the last 2 years, all I've been reading is just Bitcoin, money, Federal Reserve.
I've heard of that. The author of that book, I remember maybe
Amazing.
20 years ago, Oprah Winfrey recommended that.
Yes.
And I looked it up. He's a really interesting guy. Yeah.
Amazing.
What's his name? Gary something or other?
Yes, Gary. I don't know how to pronounce the last name, but it's a phenomenal book. And like, once you have that reference point of just, we think about Bitcoin a lot, we're thinking about our monetary system, and then it just informs the way you look at, I think, everything in life and the potential for real change and progress and prosperity. And I'm very hopeful for the future, just like you.
Can I say one more thing before we leave? Because you touched on something really interesting, and the book that you raised is really important as well. I think people need to just, I know it's an overused term, but we're all on Twitter so much, and we're so obsessed with Bitcoin, the Bitcoin price and everything else, that something like mindfulness, mental health, these things, they are real. Please take the time to, check in with yourself, as they say. I hate using these terms, but look, this has been a really intense experience for me. It's pretty much been day and night for more than a year, 2 years now, almost a year and a half. And, the dopamine depletion, the mental exhaustion, the absolute focus and obsession with one subject matter and all the things contained within this community. You need to take time out. You will feel much better. I took my first holiday in 2 years, and I feel absolutely sensational. So if you can't afford to get away for a holiday, just get away from your screens for a day or two and see how you feel. I'm sure you'll feel a lot better for it too. So I just want to say that. Thanks.
Amen. Well, yeah, we need a well-rested Archie for all that tweeting. Thank you so much for joining me and for being your first interview, right?
Oh, was it worth the wait? You've been asking me, so look, we should tell everybody.
I've been persistent.
you were the first person to ask me, actually. Yay. So I wanted to reward that loyalty, and you've asked me many, many times, and I actually felt bad in rejecting your requests for an interview.
I get a lot of rejections, just so people know.
I've got to become accustomed to that as well, because now I'm asking people to come onto my space, and I'm like, should I take this fucking personally? What's his problem? Why didn't you come on my show?
Oh, I had it all. I mean, this is what your journalism career prepares you for. You have no idea how many doors were slammed in my face. I always had to ask people to talk to me on the worst day of their lives. So now I'm not asking, too tough of questions. Bitcoin's definitely a happier subject than ones that I've covered, but you know what? I will be persistent, and I got you. So it pays off.
Well, I can learn from your persistence and your resilience as well. So thank you for everything that you do. And thank you for this interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Archie.